to the Nashville Daily Podcast. I am your co-host, Stuart Deming, and today's episode is brought to you by XPLRTours.com. If you want to learn about the city of Nashville, come take a walking tour with us. Head over to XPLRTours.com and use the code ND10 to take 10% off of your ticket purchase. And you can learn about the city of Nashville, the history, and where the city of Nashville is going. We talk about the East Bank, River North, Tennessee State Capitol, and so much more. I do want to give an update on the Middle Tennessee Bear. It was last spotted in Smyrna as of, I believe, Saturday night. It was going down through Smyrna, so it's made its way through south from Murray County into Davidson County. Now it's going back, so maybe it's going down towards like Savage Gulf State Park. Aaron, have you seen the photos of the bear circulating in front of the Angel Wings?
I've seen it there. Amazing. I've seen it at the Grand Ole Opry.
Yeah, the Grand Ole Opry one was my favorite one.
My theory about the bear so far is that I saw it it glimpsed into East Nashville, and then it said, "Nah, I'm good," and then it just went
straight to Smyrna.
Down to Smyrna.
The Grand Ole Opry one was interesting because it was not a black bear. I don't think it was like more of like a brown bear or a grizzly bear.
Yeah, they could have at least Photoshop the actual bear that came into Nashville. That's okay. All right. Today on the podcast, very exciting because we have Tennessee State Senator Heidi Campbell and Nashville Mayoral candidate. So, Heidi Campbell, welcome to the show. Thanks for being on today.
Great to be here with you guys today.
Heidi, could you go ahead and tell us about yourself, like where you got started and where you are now?
Sure. Yeah. I think it's really good to know people's genesis stories. So I think it's great that you're asking that because I think it informs kind of who a candidate is. And so I never intended to get involved in politics. I was in a rock band, and we were a really good rock band. We played, I'll date myself here. We opened for Hootie and the Blowfish, and
nice.
The Dave Matthews Band played the Lilith Fair.
Did you guys do a lot of like circuit traveling then?
Mm-hmm. Okay. Yes, in a Jeep.
Oh, that's fun.
Nothing glamorous. And we never made any money. So I started licensing music to film and television because that actually was lucrative, and I'd written some songs, and I decided to start doing it for my friends because I had a bunch of people I knew who were also struggling and had written amazing stuff, and so started a licensing company, and it was doing really well, and realized that I needed to build up my business chops because I was in a little over my head, so I went to Vanderbilt to get my MBA and met my husband and fell in love with him and went up to Minneapolis where he was finishing up his JD MBA, had a couple kids, kind of like a salmon, went up north and had a couple kids and then came back down and dragged that man down here the way we Southern girls do. And we were moving into Oak Hill, which is a satellite city in Nashville. And I found out in our residential only city that they were going to be building this huge shopping mall the size of Cool Springs. They're going to blast into the hillside.
So where specifically in Oak Hill? Like right near Radnor Lake?
Yeah. It was going to be adjacent to Radnor Lake property. It was on the corner of Old Hickory Boulevard and Franklin Pike.
Yep. Okay.
Yep.
So they were planning on doing a shopping center there.
Yeah, and they were going to blast into the hill. I mean, it was going to be massive.
Which is really interesting because that's where the Battle of Nashville happened, and that land's not preserved, and so that was happening in Oak Hill. Before we get back to that topic, could we talk about a satellite city and what exactly that means? So Nashville became a countywide government.
A city-county government.
Early 1960s.
Yes, yeah. I believe it was 67 or so.
Yes, maybe. I can't remember. Maybe 63. It's something. But at that time, there was Berry Hill, there was Oak Hill, there was Bellevue, there was Donaldson, these separate neighborhoods that were technically separate towns within Nashville or near Nashville. So what does it mean to be a mayor of a satellite city?
So Oak Hill's incorporation does predate Nashville's incorporation. And let's just be honest, the reason that those cities were created was basically for segregation purposes.
Okay.
And so, those satellite cities have continued to exist frankly, because they were established and nobody's ever challenged that. And the people who have lived there have wanted to maintain their right to control their zoning. And so that's really the reason they continue to exist.
Do you know when Oak Hill was incorporated then?
It was 19. I'm not going to get it right.
Okay.
I mean, it was before Nashville.
Okay. We'll put it in the show notes. We'll find it and put it in the show notes.
Yeah,
Yeah.
good. Sounds great. I used to know. But Forest Hills, Oak Hill, and Belle Meade, those are all cities that are satellite cities. And so to be a mayor of that city, it's really, really good training for any political job because it's incredibly divisive. I mean, the people who live there really hold you to account. I mean, you'll never find a group of people who are more adamant about, making sure that they're getting what they want. And I learned a lot of lessons there. It was like a Williamson County School Board meeting every day.
What made you want to run? You were talking about the possibility of the shopping center being put over there near Radnor.
Yeah.
What is that something that kind of sparked something in you and said, I need to kind of speak up and say something?
As I'd said, I never had any interest in politics. It certainly wasn't my jam to be an activist. That's not really who I am. But I wanted to stop that from happening because it was a residential-only city, and I saw that probably Franklin Pike was going to turn into Hillsborough Road in short order.
Yep.
And so I decided to fight it, and we started a group called Save Oak Hill, and there are little bunnies on the signs, and we got a petition, and we stopped it, and then we kind of looked around and said, somebody's got to run for mayor because this is just going to happen again. And I was the sucker that raised my hand. And that was sort of my gateway drug into politics.
So being a satellite mayor, was there conflict? Because you're technically within city limits of Nashville.
Yeah.
So how does that play out?
So you really learned a lot about zoning, permitting, local control. We really battled with a lot of local control issues. When I came in, our reserves had been diminished by over half, and that's a very big deal because we really, really struggled to keep our roads up and the trash going and all of those sorts of things. So I tightened our budget.
All of those things are separate from the city of Nashville.
Yes,
the
right.
roads.
It's
okay.
part of the greater services district and not the urban or the general services district and not the urban services district. So I tightened our belt and added back to our reserves. I got rid of my own personal salary to do the right thing and add back to our reserves, and then some at a time when our greatest source of revenue, the hall tax, was being phased out. And then I was appointed to the Mayor's Caucus, the Greater Nashville Regional Council. And that was really when I started to learn about what was going on with our city in relationship to the state. Served on the Solid Waste Board, the South Corridor Task Force, and the Transit Alliance, and so started to get a picture of kind of what was going on in Nashville, but also what was going on in Nashville relative to the state, and it was not great. And so I decided to run for Senate and ran against a guy named Steve Dickerson, flipped the first state Senate seat that we flipped from red to blue in over 25 years, and that was in 2020, so that wasn't really that long ago.
No, it's been 3 years, which is that's crazy to think.
It feels like a lifetime ago.
It feels like a lifetime ago, but also it's like 2020. You're like, oh yeah, that felt like yesterday kind of thing.
That was a
at the
thing.
same time.
Yeah.
Isn't it weird how COVID kind of changed the
our
way
perception of time?
Yes. Yeah.
Could we talk about the Nashville Regional Council?
Yeah.
So the Nashville Regional Council is 10 or 12 counties, and it's basically all of the different mayors in the surrounding counties and communities of Nashville trying to figure out some type of way to connect all of Middle Tennessee. So could we break down what exactly that they do?
Yeah, that's right, and it's really important because a lot of our issues are very regional at this point. I mean, we've really become a greater regional area.
Yes.
And so it's become more and more important over time. But so when I came into the Greater Nashville Regional Council, it was primarily focused towards helping the older community and transit. It was really focused on transit and congestion and traffic and studies on that, and some other studies. But those were the main focus offices because, that is a very regional issue. I got Michael Skipper to bring on trash because I said, you know what? I was on the solid waste board and I said, we are in massive trouble with our trash. Our landfills are almost at capacity and we have to do something about it. So we brought trash on board as a subject, and that was, again, that was probably in about 2018.
So this was before the whole debate of the Rutherford County landfill.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And really, it's a group of people who, mayors who talk about, they don't really care about all of the ideological issues that we fight about up in the legislature. They want to get problems solved because as mayors, we get in big trouble if our constituents are mad and we're not solving problems. So, it's a bunch of no BS guys, really. And I think in the past, we haven't had mayors that have really realized the value and the importance of that group of people. And some mayors have been more attentive to that group than others. Some mayors don't really like to show up. We've had 5,000 mayors since then. I mean, we've had a big churn.
Yeah.
A big churn.
Because how many communities are represented in that? It's like 200 and some?
Oh gosh, yes.
Yeah.
I mean, depending on how you define a community, a lot. Yeah. And most of them are Republican mayors, and they're really great guys. I mean, I'm really good friends with a lot of them still, and they really want to solve problems. And so when the Nashville mayor does not center that group or give that group the respect it deserves, I think it's problematic for our whole region. So that's a big differentiator in me as a candidate when you're looking at this group of candidates and saying, why would I choose any one of them? I would say that that relationship and that experience is really important because we are a regional area, especially when it comes to transit and trash, and everything is contiguous in one way or another. But also with the big divisive relationship with the state, it's very important to have relationships with those mayors because we can put leverage on them to encourage their legislators to do the right thing.
Has there been any proposed solutions from the Greater Nashville Regional Council on how to fix transit?
Loads. Unfortunately, when our transit referendum did not pass, when we voted on it, and that was politically fraught for so many reasons, but
it was such a missed opportunity there. That was a very
It was
interesting
also
time.
Expensive price tag.
Yeah,
it was.
$11 So
it was, but it was also a complicated time politically. But in any case, when that didn't pass, we did what organizations always do in those situations, which was we punted back to studies. And so there have been a lot of studies, and we really have a good handle. Yes, we have a good handle on the projection of congestion and traffic, and it's not good. I mean, we're supposed to have an increase in 60% average of our wait time in traffic over the next decade. That's for those of us who've already found ourselves sitting in traffic, that's not a good thing.
No.
So recently, Tennessee approved the private-public partnerships for transit, and they're using the terminology choice lanes. So what's your thoughts on all of this on a regional and statewide thing?
So I'm the only senator that voted against that bill, and that is why. There were some, first of all, I think that biggest transportation package we passed in the history of our state. And,
It's valued at 27 billion?
26, I believe.
Yeah.
Yep.
Yeah, 26 and some change.
Yep.
And so it's huge bill, but it's mostly paving. It's not really focused on meaningful transit.
Yep.
And then there was the choice lane component and the fact that Nashville really gets shafted in the deal. The reason that I have a problem with those choice lanes, I've lived in cities, like I lived in Minneapolis, as I said, where they have choice lanes, and it can work. But here's the deal. We constantly talk in this state about how fiscally stable we are. And let's not conflate fiscal stability with fiscal responsibility because those are different. But we talk a lot about how fiscally stable we are. We are probably the most fiscally stable state in the country in terms of our bond rating. We could pay ourselves to borrow money from ourselves. That's how,
Because we have a AAA rating.
That's right.
Yep.
Yes. And so why on earth, if it's a financially lucrative prospect to build these lanes, would we have out of the country private entities building them and profiting off of them? That's one thing. The other thing is the entry points for these choice lanes are going to be out around the 840 area. So nobody here in Nashville is going to be able to capitalize upon the congestion relief. And then lastly, I'll say that it once again puts us in a position where we're on the hook for maintaining as a city infrastructure that's owned by somebody else and somebody else is profiting off of.
Yeah, it's something interesting. So Stuart and I actually did an entire episode of the history of 840 not too long ago.
Oh, yeah.
Because I think a lot of people were saying, it's going to relieve the trucks are going to use it. They're going to go around Nashville.
And that's not been the case.
No, they're still driving through 40 just as much as ever. So it's very interesting. So what do you see as and I know Radnor Yard just kind of mentioned in your in your policy book, but
let me give context.
Go ahead.
If people don't know what Radnor Yards is,
yeah.
So it's a train depot that transports massive amounts of automobiles and other goods. That facility makes CSX about $12 to $15 million a day. It's 700. I think it's like 739 acres. It's a massive piece of land here in Middle Tennessee, and there's been talks over the last 10 to 15 years about potentially relocating this down to Smyrna. So go ahead with your question.
With Radnor Yards and all the experience that you've seen talking with all of these other communities and the regional council and everything, if obviously paving. Like you said, paving can only go so far. It doesn't.
That's if they do a good job,
right?
Yeah.
I know that even pre-pandemic, the regional council was hosting a lot of meetings to say, "Hey, we're looking into all of these rails that are going to connect all the counties into Nashville." And then the pandemic hit, and it really just seemed like a lot of that. Not necessarily stopped, but there's a big holding pattern with stuff like that.
Yeah.
So with Radnor Yards, with all of this stuff, what are you seeing as how Nashville and the whole region could be set up for success with stuff like this and what you think would be a great path going forward?
I look at this in terms, and a lot of things, frankly, in terms of opportunity costs. Nashville has been, I think everybody would agree, very haphazardly built. And so there wasn't a lot of city planning, and our supposed wagon wheel structure is kind of, choppy.
The wheels are falling off.
there's no bridges that connect half.
Yeah, we are like the Oregon Trail wagon that is breaking down, and we got to make some bad choices.
I like
they're going through the Rockies right now.
I like that analogy. Trying to get meaningful right-of-way is incredibly expensive because, you might be able to get some here or there, but to make it contiguous is almost impossible.
What do you mean by meaningful right-of-way?
Where we could actually put transit.
Okay.
Yeah, that's what I mean. So, and by that I mean that it can't be contiguous. I mean, obviously with these kinds of things, you have to be able to keep going.
Yep.
And so this would be an amazing opportunity to actually free up internal rail lines in the city that we could use. And CSX, I would argue, might be pretty sick at this point of pushing their freight through our city because it's a pain for them to do that.
I'm sure they get calls every single day
especially
complaining.
If you look at Wedgwood, Houston, and you have that we call it the triangle of death.
Yep.
And you get stuck there. There was an ambulance stuck there last week with a patient in the ambulance.
Wow.
And the ambulance was literally stuck in that triangle and could not get out.
Oh, wow.
And so. And then there's hours sometimes that those trains are sitting because Radnor Yards is too occupied or too full. So those other trains have to sit till the other trains leave.
Oh, wow. Yeah. I didn't know about the ambulance. That's terrible. Anyway, it's a sixth of the cost to do this. TDOT did a study on this a while back. It's a sixth of the cost of our transit referendum. And we free up all these internal rail routes. Look, I mean, for people who are opposed to rail, we can have that conversation. We don't necessarily have to use them for rail. We could use them for bus routes. We could use them for multimodal connectivity. But to have that, and multimodal is another thing that we are just, you can't ride a bike safely in Nashville.
Or you can't walk safely.
Yes. That's right.
Yeah.
You know, I mean, you're walking along a sidewalk and it ends. And we know this because of our pedestrian and biker death rates.
Which is statistically high compared to the rest of the country.
That's correct.
Yeah.
Yes. And it's very dangerous to walk and bike in Nashville.
I like the option. Like, I think having rail interconnected within the other counties would be very significant. Like the Nashville Star, I think if their hours of operation were better, and more consistent, like people would be taking that all the time. I would be.
Yeah.
'Cause I live right near a station for the Nashville Star. I would be taking that to downtown if it was more consistent. So I think having the other rails around the other counties coming in, I think that would be consistent. But I like the idea of turning that into walking lanes and maybe a fast bus lane too.
And
Yeah.
right. I mean, and I feel like the possibility could be fairly flexible as to everything that could be done there. And you mentioned, CSX, maybe they're tired of getting all these complaints and headache going through our city. What are your thoughts? Do you think they're willing to play ball a little bit?
I mean, CSX, as we know, has been notoriously hard to deal with because they,
And you can't practice intimate domain of them, correct?
Well, no, you can't. Although I will say that there is, there are federal laws relative to passenger rail, and that actually is pertinent here because I'm having a study.
Amtrak's doing a lot of movement here in Tennessee. Well, everywhere.
Yeah, and I had a study done as a senator with TACIR, which is don't ask me to tell you what that acronym is. It's TACIR. Anyway, they do studies for the state. And I had a study done on passenger rail. And we really would have an incredible increased leverage if Nashville to Chattanooga was their choice of route for their first study.
It used to be.
Yeah.
A route.
Yeah, right. Exactly. And Chattanooga is being connected as we speak to Atlanta. And so that would really connect Nashville to the Eastern network. And that'd be amazing. And so my point is that actually does give you the ability, if there is connectivity in terms of getting people to the rail argument with CSX. So there's a company in Florida called Brightline. This is a completely private railroad company that's doing passenger trains from Miami to, I believe, Orlando. Would you be opposed to a private train line coming into Tennessee or into Nashville? I mean, not if it's the best deal for Nashvillians. I really, as I said, with the choice lanes and the transportation deal, I don't think that that's a good deal for Nashvillians at all. So if it's a good deal for Nashvillians, yes, I would be interested in looking at it. Obviously, we are in a situation where affordability is first and foremost in this city, and so we need to make sure that we're not increasing expenses for Nashvillians at all.
So speaking of, you go ahead, Aaron.
No, go ahead.
Speaking of affordability, there's this massive topic on the East Bank where the Nissan Stadium is and everything. So there's a lot of Metro-owned land. So what if you won mayor, what would you do for the affordability of that land and everything?
Yeah, so this has become a central issue, I guess, in this campaign, and I have to say that my value system is that I would much rather put money into education and affordable housing, and quite frankly, the arts. But the fact of the matter is that deal's been done. And so the next mayor is not here to relitigate that. The next mayor should be here or complain about it, but should be here to actually make sure we're getting the best possible deal for Nashvillians going forward. And that really means not recreating more of the tourist side, downtown Broadway area, but actually making a place that is focused on livability for Nashvillians. And that means a lot of green space. We want to see affordable housing there. There is a plan to put a route from light rail route from there to the airport, which I think, bachelorette's in and bachelorette's out.
We've been talking about that for years, the light rail coming from the airport into downtown.
And I think that's great. I served on the St. Paul, Minnesota District Council when we were doing light rail to the airport, and it has been a huge lifestyle upgrade for the people along that corridor. So I am a proponent of that. I think that's a great idea.
Do you think that light rail would go down Murfreesboro Pike, or do you think it would come down Lebanon Pike?
I don't know.
Okay. Or do you think it would go across the river just make its own thing.
Yeah, I don't know. I'm not sure about that. I do know that they put a station or a place for a station in the new airport structure
Yes.
to anticipate that.
Yep.
So, but no, I think we have to do that. And then obviously we want multimodal connectivity, green space, livability. We want to clean up the river. I've been talking to some environmental groups about cleaning the river up because it's really
It's
dirty.
disgusting.
It's gross. Yeah. And we need to really, for all kinds of reasons, we
Yeah.
need to clean up the river.
Yeah. And for all this to happen, it takes a good permitting process.
Yeah.
I know you've talked about that as that's a frustration for anybody who's trying to get anything done.
Yeah.
We've
in
talked to
Nashville.
multiple commercial developers that want to bring inventory to the market, and they're like, "Yeah, it's been 10 months. I can't do anything with my land."
Yeah.
Right,
So
right.
Can you talk about what those issues are, maybe why they exist and what
Yeah.
you're thinking about doing with that?
And I'll even add that I've talked to developers that would like to bring in affordable housing.
Yep.
And
Yeah.
they are not going to do it because they don't want to deal with our permitting process.
Well, then the Metro Council approved this really good incentive. If you built a certain amount of your inventory affordable housing, you get a tax break. And so,
Yep.
but the permitting process is a mess in this city. Right
It is a mess. And as somebody who was deep into the permitting process, because I was the mayor of Oak Hill and we worked on that a lot, I was on the planning commission, I can tell you that bottlenecks can destroy you. And we have, some of the permitting process works well, but we have these bottlenecks that are, once again, opportunity costs that we should not be incurring because we're not willing to pay a building inspector, another $1,000 a year.
Right.
So that we have, competitive job opportunities for lighting and building inspectors. These are the bottlenecks we're seeing, and I really do think that so much of Metro Nashville government is laden with inefficiencies, and we can really streamline that by just doing some course corrections right in the middle of that process, because it's there is an assembly line component to it, and if there's one part of it that's bogged down, you have people waiting years to get permits, and that's money. That's,
Oh, yeah.
Well, then
It's
you're losing,
money,
you're
it's
losing
opportunity.
out on the tax
Yeah.
revenue. If they're a restaurant, you're
Yep.
losing out on the alcohol tax. You're losing out on the sales tax. Like, there's so much lost income from that for
Well,
waiting.
yeah,
Yes.
and the amount of jobs that could come in from construction and all the costs that come in with building that development and getting those things ready are just they're out, and so many places are just sitting with a fence around them waiting
Right.
for those things to happen and waiting for money to be influxed into that area.
Yes.
And Heidi, I don't think we got to talk too much about what made you want to jump into the
Mayoral.
Nashville mayoral race. Can you talk about that? I mean, you're seeing a lot of things from up high in Tennessee at the state, just down the street. Can you talk about what made you want to be
Sure.
a part of this race?
Yeah, so I was my guy for this race was Bob Freeman. He's a friend of mine, and
we've had Bob Freeman in the studio. He was on a different podcast, but he was in the studio.
Love him, and I have been hassling him for over a year to be the mayor. I would have been his biggest cheerleader, but he decided not to do it and asked me to do it. And so Bob Freeman, John Ray Clemens, Bo Mitchell, actually Gloria Johnson, Sarah Kyle, school board member Cheryl Mays, they've all endorsed me. And this is why. We need a mayor who understands the relationship with the state. That is something that we ignore to our peril. We are in a situation right now where I don't think it's too extreme to say that we're dealing with an attempted hostile takeover of our city. And if we do not have a mayor,
With the hostile takeover, you're talking about the
Sports
airport board,
Authority,
sports
the
board.
convention, yes. But also, the council, trying to change the size of the council, eliminating the COB, all of this.
What's the COB?
The police review board.
Oh, okay.
Yes.
That's right.
All of this encroachment into our municipal rights is alarming. And we cannot afford to have somebody in the mayoral position who does not both understand that and have the relationships to navigate it, because it's tribal. And our state legislators, they're friends of mine. You know, I love them as people, and we disagree on a handful of issues. But I've been able to work with them because you know how it is. You get to know people when you work with them. And they are not going to be open to somebody who they don't know. And so we need somebody in that seat who has relationships with them to just calm down the conversation. Because I know that all of Tennesseans, but Nashvillians, of course, are sick of fighting.
Yep.
They don't want to fight anymore. They just want to solve problems. And
is it that sorry for interrupting, is it that the state and the Metro Council aren't necessarily coming to the table together to talk about this that you think is the biggest issue?
I'm not blaming anybody in that. That's just been sort of people. We are in a time in life when we're in bubbles, and Nashville's definitely in a bubble relative to the states. And so my colleagues in the legislature have endorsed me, understand that we need to have an open door communication, and that we can't afford to live in these isolated bubbles. And we certainly can't afford to be poking the state in the eye, because guess what? We may not want this to be the case, but they have more power than we have.
You're in the state. Like
that's the way it goes.
Yeah.
And it's like you don't poke that bear.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's really interesting. You're about to ask something there.
Yeah. And so you're saying essentially, and what it sounds like is that relationship has not even been. It wasn't a relationship to begin with, and maybe this was the time. These past 8 months have been the time that really kind of revealed that Metro Council and the state don't really have a relationship. That needs to be. That needs to be something that's at least established that really hasn't been established before.
Yeah, we have to prioritize that. And not only that, I would just say I see the Office of the Mayor as a venture catalyst, not a venture capitalist, but a venture catalyst to facilitate communication on all levels. I mean, there's all kinds of federal money that we are not receiving because we're not paying attention to it, and we're not making sure that our businesses and nonprofits know about that. So the Office of the Mayor needs to be a place, and I even did this in my state Senate seat during COVID. I actually identified some of those opportunities and made sure that we were letting Nashvillians know about it. But the Office of the Mayor needs to be a place that really catalyzes that communication on all levels, federal to state to nonprofit to education, all of those areas that, really need to communicate with each other. And we've had sort of a little bit of an isolated perspective on those things, and I really believe that needs to change. I think communication is the key to getting us through the coming months.
Awesome.
Do you think and this is just a question I just had, do you think the tensions of how the state handled COVID and how the city of Nashville handled COVID, that's what ultimately caused some of this argument? Like this bitterness towards each other?
I think it's part of a greater plan. The Council for National Policy has actually the Southern Strategy, and the taking over the state legislatures has been a calculated plan. But I also think that we're dealing with human beings who, I know and love and care about, and that they also can be encouraged to, calm down a little bit about this, especially if you're leveraging your relationship with the regional mayors who, are in their districts and can put pressure on them. I think it's a multifaceted approach to basically just saying, hey, let's all try to employ some positivity here and solve problems instead of trying to fight about things.
Yeah. That's good.
Awesome. Heidi, thank you so much for coming on the show and telling your story. We really, really appreciate it. Can you let people know where to find you and where they can find out more information about you and all of that?
Well, that was too short. It was so fun to talk to you.
That's 34 minutes.
I know.
We're over that 30-minute mark.
I know.
Vote HeidiCampbell.com, and 615-438-6338 is my cell phone number. And so feel free to text me if you'd like to talk about anything. And thanks so much for having me today.
Awesome. Well, thank you for being on the show. We really, really appreciate it. Looking forward to seeing you more on the trail, and good luck with all the other rest of the forums and debates and everything like that. Yeah.
Head over to NashvilleDailyPodcast.com to see the show notes. We're going to put a lot in there from the Radnor yards and everything else that we talked about today. We'll see you guys tomorrow. you for listening to the Nashville Daily Podcast. If you want to learn more, head to NashvilleDailyPodcast.com.
You can also follow us on social media at explore.nash on Instagram, Nashville Daily Podcast on YouTube, and explore.nash on YouTube as well.
The Nashville Daily Podcast is an Explore LLC production, copyright 2023.